Welcome to Josh Plays 40k. I'm Josh, the host, and today I am going to be talking about the diorama we have built for Orktober, something that my partner and I came up with to show off and celebrate the month. We have decided to go for a sort of desert-themed sort of orc encampment where the last stragglers of boys are getting ready to defend themselves from any attackers that may be oncoming. We have focused mainly on the orcs rather than the enemy and the surroundings that they've got. So obviously I hope you enjoy, and we'll talk you through the process that we went through. So the first thing we started off by doing was by painting the small bits of terrain that we had. This actually came from the Orc mech shop kit from Games Workshop that we used, a few plastic kits. We used only a few parts of that for the scrap piles and for the barricades that came with it, as I thought it would make a nice outlook as an encampment for the boys. We sort of thought we'd start off by painting this to get a rough idea of how we wanted it to look. I was really mainly going for the sort of rusted and damaged effect, as if it had been there for many years, and the orcs had been sort of slowly blown away from the planet as war raged on. So the way we did this was using mostly a combination of contrast paints and standard sort of base and layer paints and shades to get the effects we were going for. Now, with the sort of rusted effect at the end, which was something we were very keen to get on the model right, we used the technical paint Typhus Corrosion. This was to give it some texture, some roughness to it, before going over with a dry brush of Riser Rust. Now, one thing I definitely recommend doing when you're looking at any sort of small piece of terrain is to make sure you have cut off all the little bits of sprue that sometimes linger on that aren't in the obvious places, as I did come across I think 3 small pieces that I forgot to cut off, and it does cause a little bit of trouble afterwards when you're trying to tidy up and then repaint around those areas, so do keep an eye out for that, for definite. Once we were happy with the terrain as it sat, we then moved on to the actual base build itself, and for that we used a sort of cardboard foam as the base, and then sort of hard foam to going over the top for creating hills and terrain. Now, because obviously we were looking at a desert themed, there wasn't going to be other buildings or anything like that, but instead more rocks and a landscaped sort of scenic background. And for that we used the foam to cut and create hills and terrain that would be befitting for that kind of landscape. The choices that you then have to make is how you want it to be laid out, whether you want it to create and be a part of the landscape as in a big way, or whether you just want it as a small sort of backdrop. We went really for definition of the boundaries of the landscape itself, leaving obviously 2 edges of that open rather than breaking it, or rather than covering it entirely. So it was just a case really more for keeping it to the right angled edges of the board. After we were happy with getting that foam in place, we then had to find a way of tidying up the clean edges of where we'd cut the foam. Obviously in the landscape you wouldn't have clean cut sheared edges of a cliff face or rock faces or anything like that. So we came across this really good sort of texture paint. It has no pigment to it. You can mix it with paint to create one, but it's not actually for that. And that's made by AK Interactive, and it's called Rough Terrain, and it's more of a paste rather than a paint, but it comes out quite nicely with a brush. You can water it down if you want to, but you don't need to, and that offered a really good coverage only for the rock faces itself, and a little bit sort of going into the board just to give that initial step towards creating the landscape that we wanted. Once that had set, and it does take a good 24 hours really to get the hardness that you need to for moving on. We then moved on to another AK Interactive feature, which was called Light Earth Terrain and Light Earth Texture, sorry, and that itself had a paste-like nature to it, which gave a more textured base, but we put that all over the board, including what we had previously done. Now, because this did have a pigment to it, that obviously then gave us a good base coat, if you like, to work up from when adding the extra terrain of the itself and the stones and grass and what have you going onto it. So that was where we went to next. Again, that takes a good 12 to 24 hours to completely set. So I'd highly recommend, obviously, just leaving that to one side and instead of risking moving it or damaging it in any way. Once that had set, we then moved on to the initial sort of extra texture that we were building up on from that, which was adding gravel and a few bits of rocks to that. Now, we did that simply with some watered down PVA and brushing that over the top of this texture. As it dries clear, you haven't got to worry about it contaminating the pigment of the light earth. And we just simply used some sort of gravel effects that we picked up from various little hobby shops and what I've had from over the years, sort of mixing it together with different sort of sizes. There was fine, some medium grit mixed up in there, and we just scattered that all over the base. It's worth noting as well that for good timekeeping and management, when you're working on dioramas like this, especially if you've got, if you work during the day like we do, and you've got other things going on as well, to do these to one side and then let it dry whilst you're working on other things. In this case, for instance, because there was actual models going on there, we took the time whilst it was drying to assemble those models. We did this in part because orcs are obviously quite famous for holding two different weapons. We kept the arms separate just to make the painting a lot easier. And although we weren't actually going to use the bases, we did super glue them on just with a little bit, so it made them easier to actually break off the bases in the end, so that we could then obviously glue them onto the diorama and not ruin the aesthetic using the bases. Now obviously the painting of the models, albeit we've only done 7 from the squad, as it's sort of to look like there's only a few left, they still take good time to go through, and for this we used a mixture of contrast and unusual paints and shades again, and dry brushes. The whole idea of painting them wasn't to win any awards or anything like that. It was simply as for fun and to keep things sort of moving on for basis. So the contrast paints, as I say, they give a really nice finish and effect for what we were looking for. But in actual fact, obviously, if you're looking to win a diorama or winning awards, then you may want to spend a bit more time with the usual sort of paints rather than mostly contrast. as I say, once you've then got that terrain fixed on, we then moved on to adding some rocks. Now these were just some army painter rocks that we'd picked up. They're little bits of cork mostly that have been chopped up to make various different sizes of rock. Perfect for any sort of base or scenic surround that you're looking to go for. And we just PVA'd and hot glued those into place in various different places across the board, trying to make it look as random as possible, and putting some around sort of the basis of the terrain itself to make it look like it has been there for many years, and obviously eventually the wind will have moved certain things, and the orcs themselves would have built up their own barricades with moving them across. So once we were happy with the rocks and gravel that we'd added, we moved on to creating a different sort of type of scene going on, which was using a couple of different grass techniques. The first of which was the Army Painter Battlefield Steppe grass, which is a very loose grass fitting, and again you use a PVA to put that on. And again we tried to make this sort of as random as possible, where it would be growing in the crevices of the rock piles, and obviously on the corners of the cliff faces that we were trying to make, and we put this down and then allowed that to set before using again Army Painter, but this was a sort of lighter grass sort of tufts that come there. They actually have sort of sticky pads on the bottom of them for mostly going on smaller, obviously model bases, but in this case we just used a fine pair of tweezers to put them where we wanted them. And again, it wasn't supposed to be too regimented as to where they went. It was just a case of where we thought would look in the best places for them. Now obviously, as I said before, with keeping the time management, by this point you're probably getting to the end of painting the models. And we were, in fact, there was only 2 left by the point of the board being nearly complete, in sense of it was actually the main leader of the orc, the boss knob, that was still ready to be finished, and just prior to the second to last orc being done, we added some Citadel Skulls to the board itself. Now to create the rock piles, again a small rookie mistake on my part. I started sticking them together using a plastic glue without thinking that in actual fact that would melt some of that together, and in fact actually did ruin the feel I was going for with the first one I created. So after that I did move into using a SuperGlue, which obviously is a still strong bond, but doesn't actually melt the plastic together. So you keep the sort of pile effect that you're looking for. So just something else to bear in mind. Now when we'd done that, we simply then stuck them onto the base and painted them, primed them up, and then put a contrast of skeleton horde over, which creates a really good sort of bone effect straight from the pot over the top of these, and simply let that dry. In that time the boss knob was finished and glued together. We removed all of the orcs from their retrospective bases and put them to one side, heated up the hot glue gun once more, and got ready for the final assembly of putting the orcs onto the board. A very exciting time, as it was very near obviously to getting it finished, and in time for showing off. So after we've done that, we then literally stuck them on in various places. I already had a fairly good plan in my head as to where I wanted them to be. The idea of having the main scrap pile in the middle was to make it look like they were almost getting ready to charge over the top of it in places, whilst having gunners either side defending the horde. So as you can see, they've got added, and the board itself is complete. Now I really do hope that you have enjoyed this video. It's certainly a first for us here on Josh Plays 40k. We're hoping more dioramas will come out in the future with slightly less rickety video filming, so that we're obviously a bit more experienced in what we were doing. But it's been great fun, great learning experience. We'll try and add some links to below with some of the bits that we've used, so that obviously if you're looking to recreate anything similar, then you can get an idea of the products that we used in this. But otherwise, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Thank you.